In the world of Hollywood, where fame and reality often collide, one duet changed everything. A film, a song, and two stars whose chemistry could not be ignored, yet their connection was more complex than the world ever saw. By 1964, Elvis Presley was a cultural titan, a man whose name was synonymous with music, style, and a lifestyle that had the world captivated. Ann-Margret, on the other hand, was a rising star in the Hollywood ranks, a woman whose ambition burned brightly, but whose place in the entertainment industry was still being carved out. When these two came together for the iconic film Viva Las Vegas, no one could have predicted how their on-screen chemistry would ignite the hearts of millions and leave a lasting imprint on both of their careers. But what if that unforgettable chemistry wasn't just a script or a camera trick? What if it told a deeper story, one of love, struggle, and sacrifice that the world would never fully know? This was no ordinary duet. For Elvis, the king of rock and roll, it was a moment that played out in front of the world. But underneath the surface, his personal battles were beginning to weigh heavy. And for Ann-Margret, it was more than just a scene in a film. It was the culmination of a dream, one that would bring her face to face with a love she couldn't fully have. Yet, neither could let go of the fire that burned between them, even if they were both powerless to change the circumstances surrounding it. The moment they sang together, the world watched. The Viva Las Vegas duet became not just a cinematic moment, but a mirror reflecting the turbulent emotions, unspoken truths, and raw vulnerabilities of two people at the top of their game, but teetering on the edge of personal upheaval. The passion on screen was real, but the connection that fueled it, what they truly shared, is what made this duet unforgettable. What if I told you this duet wasn't just about the chemistry we saw on screen, but about the untold story of the battles, the heartbreak, and the choices they both made behind the scenes? What if their connection was something far more profound than the glitz and glamour of Hollywood? In the next few minutes, we're going to dive into this incredible real-life story that transcends the film and takes us deeper into the hearts of these two legendary figures. And by the end, you may never look at Viva Las Vegas or their chemistry quite the same way again. By the mid-1960s, Elvis Presley wasn't just a rock and roll star, he was an institution. His name had become synonymous with fame, rebellion, and a lifestyle that entranced millions. But as the world looked on, a quieter and darker battle was brewing in the king's life. The pressure of constant fame was beginning to take its toll. Elvis, at the height of his success, was trapped between the man he wanted to be and the king his fans demanded. With every new record, every movie, every adoring fan, the pressure mounted. But no one saw the cracks in the armor. Behind the dazzling smile and the glittering stage persona was a man deeply conflicted, struggling with the weight of expectations and his personal demons. His marriage to Priscilla Presley, though filled with love at first, was starting to unravel under the strain of his relentless touring and the allure of new glamorous encounters. The spark that once ignited his passion had dimmed, and in its place was a man searching for something more. Enter Ann-Margret, a rising star in Hollywood with beauty, talent, and a hunger for success. At just 23 years old, she had already made a name for herself with her performances in Bye Bye Birdie and State Fair, and Hollywood was starting to take notice. But for Ann-Margret, fame didn't come easy. She faced an unforgiving industry that didn't always know what to do with a woman who had both ambition and an undeniable spark of charisma. It wasn't enough to be beautiful. She had to prove herself as more than just another pretty face. When the opportunity to star alongside Elvis in Viva Las Vegas came her way, Ann-Margret knew this could be her big break. She was about to step into the world of the king himself, a man who wasn't just a partner in a film, but the embodiment of a lifestyle, a world she had long admired from afar. But what she didn't know was just how complicated that world was going to be, and how much she would find herself drawn to the man behind the image. As the cameras began to roll, the chemistry between Elvis and Ann-Margret was palpable. They weren't just co-stars, they were sparks waiting to catch fire. The scenes they shared felt more like moments of intimacy, raw emotion, and connection. But that connection, as magnetic and undeniable as it was, came with a heavy cost. Ann-Margret's rising star was no longer just about Hollywood's approval. It was about navigating a world where she couldn't afford to show any vulnerability. She was no longer just the cute young actress. She was a woman in a cutthroat industry who had to fight for every ounce of respect. And in that moment, as she stood next to Elvis Presley, her internal struggle began to mirror the one she had seen him face on screen. A battle between the life they were living and the life they both secretly longed for. But while the pressures weighed heavily on Ann-Margret's shoulders, it was Elvis who carried a burden far greater than anyone could see. Fame wasn't just a thrill for him, it was a prison. As he sat on the set of Viva Las Vegas, surrounded by luxury, wealth, and adoration, the king of rock and roll knew all too well that the price of fame was not just privacy or peace, it was his soul. His life wasn't his own, and every smile, every performance, every public appearance was a performance of its own, a role that had been thrust upon him years ago and was now impossible to escape. But amidst the whirlwind of his career, Elvis found something in Ann-Margret. She wasn't just another Hollywood starlet trying to latch onto his fame. She was different. She was ambitious, driven, and incredibly talented. Yet she, too, was finding it hard to carve her own path in the harsh, competitive world of Hollywood. The mutual respect they shared was rooted in their own struggles. As they performed together, side by side, a bond was forming. A bond that wasn't just professional but deeply personal. But that bond didn't come without its own complexities. Ann-Margret wasn't the only one trying to prove herself. Elvis was proving something to himself every single day. The king wasn't just battling the world, he was battling the man in the mirror, the one who no longer recognized the reflection staring back at him. And Ann-Margret, for all her ambition and drive, was a woman walking a razor-thin line between professional success and emotional vulnerability. This duet wasn't just a moment in a film. It was the culmination of two lives colliding at the intersection of fame, love, and personal sacrifice. And as the cameras rolled and the song played, what the world saw was far from the full picture. Behind the scenes, the stakes were rising. For Elvis, his marriage to Priscilla was starting to fray. For Ann-Margret, the weight of living up to the expectations of Hollywood was becoming unbearable. The film was more than just a movie, it was their lives. Their unspoken connection was a mirror to the lives they both lived. Unreal, and yet so painfully real. They had both come to the crossroads of their careers, but it wasn't just about the movie, it was about the lives they were trying to hold together but apart. As the filming of Viva Las Vegas continued, the chemistry between Elvis and Ann-Margret only intensified. It was clear to everyone on set, their performances were electric, their interactions undeniably magnetic. The chemistry wasn't just an act for the cameras, it was an emotional undercurrent that flowed through every scene, every glance, every shared laugh. But as their connection grew stronger, so did the tension, the unspoken acknowledgement that something deeper was stirring beneath the surface. For Elvis, the emotional conflict was becoming unbearable. He was a married man. His vows to Priscilla were sacred, at least in the public eye. Yet, here he was, falling for another woman. The guilt was palpable, and it gnawed at him between takes. No one knew the truth, but Elvis was constantly at war with himself. The man who once embraced his image as the king of rock and roll had grown weary of the burden that fame had placed on him. He was trapped, unable to escape the image that had been carefully crafted for the world to see. And now, standing next to Ann-Margret, he was forced to confront the duality of his existence. Ann-Margret, on the other hand, was in a different kind of struggle. She had fought tooth and nail to reach this point in her career. Hollywood was a tough place for a woman, and for a woman like Ann-Margret, blonde, beautiful, but fiercely ambitious, it was even tougher. She had to prove herself at every turn, and the stakes had never been higher. To be next to Elvis was both a dream and a nightmare. She saw the real Elvis, the man behind the king facade, and it fascinated her, but it also terrified her. What was she supposed to do with this new, raw, and deeply emotional connection? She wasn't sure whether it was love or longing or something much darker, an unavoidable truth about what happens when you're caught between two worlds. The line between professional and personal began to blur, and the chemistry that had begun as an innocent spark now threatened to ignite something far more dangerous. For Ann-Margret, the choice was becoming painfully clear. She could continue to push forward in Hollywood, climbing the ladder and facing the pressures of an industry that demanded everything from her, or she could risk everything, throw caution to the wind, and fall into the arms of a man who might never be hers. But was she willing to do that? Could she afford to? And for Elvis, the internal struggle was even more profound. His marriage to Priscilla was becoming increasingly strained. The public adored them as a couple, but the private reality was far from the fairy tale. Elvis loved Priscilla, but the affection between them had faded into something distant, something that no longer felt like the love they once shared. He had spent years on the road, away from home, and his heart had wandered. But the guilt, the constant feeling of betrayal, was unbearable. The flame that once burned so brightly had dimmed, and in its place was a hollow version of love that he could no longer ignore. In the quiet moments between takes, when the cameras weren't rolling, Elvis and Ann-Margret would steal glances at each other, words unspoken but understood. There were moments when the world seemed to disappear, and all that was left was the undeniable connection they shared. But reality would soon pull them back, each time with greater force. The world wasn't ready for what they had, and the consequences of acknowledging it would have been devastating. One day, during a particularly intense scene, the tension reached its breaking point. As Elvis and Ann-Margret locked eyes during their duet, the words they were singing didn't feel like lyrics to a song. They felt like a confession. Elvis could barely meet Ann-Margret's gaze without feeling the weight of everything he had been avoiding. And Ann-Margret, despite her growing feelings for Elvis, felt a deep sense of uncertainty. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and yet, here she was, on the edge of something that could cost her everything. The song ended, but the silence between them spoke volumes. In the moments that followed, there was no applause, no laughter, no shared excitement about the success of the scene. There was just a heavy, thick silence that hung in the air. They knew this wasn't just acting anymore. This was real. This was a raw, emotional confrontation with everything they had been trying to avoid. Elvis knew that if he allowed this connection to continue, it could ruin him. It could ruin everything he had built. And yet, there was a part of him, a part that he couldn't deny, that wanted more. For Ann-Margret, the stakes were even higher. She was a young woman who had finally been given the chance of a lifetime, but with that chance came the responsibility of protecting her heart, her career, and her place in the industry. She couldn't afford to fall for a married man, no matter how much he made her feel alive. As the day ended, Elvis and Ann-Margret parted ways, but neither could shake the feeling that something had changed. The music, the chemistry, and the unspoken words were all they had left. They both knew it, and neither of them could ignore it. Their personal battles were far from over, and though the cameras would stop rolling, the consequences of their connection would continue to play out long after the film had ended. As the filming of Viva Las Vegas neared its conclusion, the tension between Elvis and Ann-Margret reached a boiling point. The chemistry that had begun as an innocent connection now felt like an undeniable force, one that neither of them could control. The songs, the laughter, the shared moments, they all held something deeper, something unspoken. But the real story, the one that neither of them could fully embrace, was waiting just beneath the surface, ready to explode. The climax came not during a scene, but in a quiet moment, a moment off-screen when the masks came off and the raw truth began to emerge. It happened after a particularly emotional day of filming. Ann-Margret had just finished a long, exhausting sequence with Elvis, and the energy between them had never been more intense. As the director called for a break, they found themselves alone for the first time in hours. The set was silent, save for the distant hum of studio lights, and the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Ann-Margret, usually the epitome of composure, stood there, unsure of what to say. The world had always viewed her as the rising star, the young actress destined for greatness. But in that moment, she felt small, vulnerable. She had never felt this way before, not even when she had faced the harshest critics in Hollywood. But there was something about Elvis, a complexity, a depth that left her both captivated and frightened. Elvis, too, felt the weight of the moment. He had always been the king, confident, powerful, in control of everything around him. But here, in front of Ann-Margret, he was just a man who was deeply torn between the life he had built and the life he craved. He had loved his wife, Priscilla, but that love had faded, replaced by something that felt real, raw, and dangerous. Something he couldn't deny, no matter how much he tried to bury it. As the silence between them grew, Elvis took a step closer to Ann-Margret, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I can't keep pretending this isn't happening," he said, his eyes searching hers for some sign of understanding. Ann-Margret met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Neither can I," she replied, her voice shaking slightly. The words felt like a confession, a truth they had both known, but had never dared to speak. It was in that moment that both of them realized the depth of what they had been avoiding. The connection between them wasn't just chemistry, it was something far more profound. It was a love that neither of them could act on, but one that neither could walk away from. The duet they had shared in Viva Las Vegas was no longer just a song. It had become the mirror of their lives. The lyrics, though sung for the cameras, had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't just a love song, it was their story. It was the story of two people who were drawn to each other despite the impossible odds, despite the lives they had built and the consequences of their actions. But as the music ended and the applause echoed through the set, something inside them shifted. For a brief moment, the world faded away. The movie, the fame, the audience, they all disappeared. It was just Elvis and Ann-Margret, standing together, feeling the weight of their unspoken connection. And yet, despite everything they shared, both of them knew that this moment would remain just that, an isolated moment in time. Elvis was married, Ann-Margret was still building her career, and their world was one that didn't allow for such indulgences. It was a fleeting connection, beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. As the set grew quiet, both of them were left to face the harsh truth. This bond, this raw, uncontainable chemistry could never last. The world would never understand it, the public wouldn't care for it, and in the end, it would only be a memory, a moment that would live on in the echo of their voices, but one they could never revisit. Ann-Margret walked away, her heart heavy with a mixture of longing and loss. She had given everything to her career, but for the first time, she wasn't sure it had been worth it. Elvis stood in the silence of the studio, alone with his thoughts. He had everything, the fame, the wealth, the adoration of millions, but there was one thing he couldn't have, one thing that would always remain just out of reach, the love he had felt in that fleeting moment with Ann-Margret. As the final moments of the film played out, so too did the final moments of their connection. Elvis and Ann-Margret would go on to lead very different lives, their careers continuing to rise, but the bond they had shared on that set would linger in their hearts long after the cameras stopped rolling. For Elvis, it was a reminder of a love that he could never have again, a love that was too complex, too powerful, and too dangerous to ever fully embrace. For Ann-Margret, it was a bittersweet memory, one that she would carry with her through the years as she continued to rise to stardom, forever shaped by the brief but undeniable connection she had shared with the king of rock and roll. The aftermath of Viva Las Vegas was a tale of diverging paths, both professionally and personally, for Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret. The film may have ended, but the emotional resonance of their time together never truly faded. The connection they shared, though fleeting, became a part of the fabric of their lives, a quiet echo of what could have been, but never was. For Elvis, life carried on in the glare of fame, but something had shifted within him. The duet with Ann-Margret had revealed a vulnerability he hadn't known he was capable of showing. Despite the adoration of millions, despite the constant stream of projects and fans that surrounded him, Elvis had come face to face with the emotional loneliness of being trapped within an image. His marriage to Priscilla continued to deteriorate, and the pressure of being the king of rock and roll weighed heavily on him. He sought solace in his music, but the spark that had once fueled his passion seemed to flicker out, replaced by the heavy weight of regrets and unfulfilled desires. But in the shadows of his success, he carried with him the memory of that moment, the raw, unspoken truth shared with Ann-Margret, the way she had looked at him as though she understood the man behind the music, the man who longed for a deeper connection than the world allowed him to have. In the years that followed, Elvis would continue to be the king, but the emotional scars of that brief, intense bond with Ann-Margret never quite healed. He may have had everything the world could offer, but the one thing he couldn't hold onto was the thing that had felt the most real. The king of rock and roll would never again experience a moment like the one he had shared with Ann-Margret on the set of Viva Las Vegas, a moment that was pure, honest, and full of potential, yet doomed by the circumstances of their lives. Ann-Margret, on the other hand, rose to even greater heights in Hollywood. The film marked a pivotal moment in her career. The intensity of her chemistry with Elvis didn't just leave an impression on the audience, it sealed her place in the annals of Hollywood history. Her performance alongside Elvis became legendary, and her career flourished in the years that followed. But the impact of Viva Las Vegas went beyond professional success. For Ann-Margret, the bond she had shared with Elvis remained a bittersweet memory that she couldn't quite shake. Despite her fame and success, she found herself revisiting that connection in quiet moments, wondering what could have been had circumstances been different. As the years passed, Ann-Margret continued to build her career and personal life. She married, had children, and found success. But the memory of her time with Elvis, that brief yet intense period, never fully left her. It was a part of her story, a part of her heart, that she would carry forever. Even as she blossomed into an iconic figure in Hollywood, she could never entirely escape the imprint of the man she had once shared a connection with. In the public eye, Elvis and Ann-Margret moved on, their paths never truly crossing again. But for those who had witnessed their time together, on screen and off, it was clear that their duet was more than just a performance. It was a glimpse into the complex, often painful world of love, fame, and sacrifice. The connection they shared was a rare and precious thing, a fleeting moment in time that would leave its mark on both of them forever. Their duet became more than just an iconic scene in a film. It became a symbol of the fragile nature of fame and love. It reminded the world that even the brightest stars have moments of vulnerability, moments of longing and loss that no one can truly escape. Their chemistry was undeniable, but so was the reality of the lives they led. And as time moved forward, both Elvis and Ann-Margret would carry the weight of that memory with them, an emotional connection that could never be recaptured. It was a reminder that sometimes, even the most powerful bonds are fleeting, unable to withstand the forces of fame, time, and circumstance. But for those who remember Viva Las Vegas, the duet between Elvis and Ann-Margret remains a timeless testament to the complexities of love and the heartache that often accompanies the pursuit of fame. Their story, though unspoken, continues to live on in the hearts of those who witnessed it. And for Elvis and Ann-Margret, it was a chapter in their lives that, no matter how much they tried to move past it, would forever define them. The story of Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret's duet in Viva Las Vegas is more than just a glimpse into Hollywood's golden age. It's a poignant reminder of the complexities of love, fame, and the human heart. In a world where everything can seem orchestrated, their chemistry, raw and undeniable, was a fleeting moment of real connection. A connection that transcended the silver screen, one that existed in the spaces between the songs, between the takes, between the smiles. This duet wasn't just a moment in a film. It was a symbol of everything these two stars had to navigate in their lives. Pressures from the public, personal conflicts, and the impossible demands of fame. For Elvis, it was a moment where he realized that no matter how high he rose, he could never truly escape the burden of being the king. For Ann-Margret, it was a bittersweet memory that reminded her of the price she had paid to carve out her own place in Hollywood. As we reflect on their time together, we see how fleeting the nature of fame and love truly is. It's easy to get lost in the glitz and glamour, to forget that behind every smile, behind every performance, lies a person with dreams, desires, and struggles. For Elvis and Ann-Margret, their bond was one of those rare moments where the world saw the real vulnerable sides of two icons, two people who were caught in a moment in time but were unable to hold on to it. Their story reminds us of the fragility of connection, of how quickly life moves, and how difficult it can be to hold on to the things that truly matter. Love, fame, and the pursuit of one's dreams can often be at odds, pulling us in different directions. And in the case of Elvis and Ann-Margret, their connection was one that was both beautiful and heartbreaking, full of longing and loss. But what do you think? Could the intensity between Elvis and Ann-Margret have led to something more? If fame hadn't intervened, could they have found a way to be together? Or was their moment always meant to be just that, fleeting and out of reach? Drop your thoughts below. Let's keep this conversation going. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with fellow fans who remember these two icons and the unforgettable connection they shared on and off the screen.